Hi, everybody. Eve Harow, Director of Community Development and Tourism for One Israel Fund. And this is our latest in the series of webinars that we have been running over this endless summer of 2020. It is now September 14th, 2020, and the very last days of the Jewish year of 5780. So this is going to be our last webinar before the Jewish holidays. For those of you who are not familiar with One Israel Fund, we've been around for 25 years, doing our best to strengthen and support the Jews living in Judea and Samaria. If it's ritual baths, if it's playgrounds, a lot of security and medical equipment. If you're interested in being a part of what we do, you can be in touch with me, eve@oneisraelfund.org. And you can, of course, always go onto our website, www.oneisraelfund.org, where you can also see all the webinars that we have been doing over the summer and the virtual tours that we have been coming out with, about one every 2 weeks, where we go into one of the communities, speak to someone living there, just to give you a little glimpse of what's really going on in Judea and Samaria, so you don't have to rely on the news. So all that content is free. Please go into the website or into our Facebook page and you can see all of it. So I'm super excited tonight to be in conversation with Rabbi Mois Navon, whom I've known for a long time and who is involved with so many fascinating things that hopefully we'll get to at least some of them tonight. He's known as the Rabbi of Mobileye, but I would like to let him in his own words explain to us where he got to that position and some of his life's journey, how he got here to Israel. Both of us live here in Gush Etzion in the Judean Hills, and this is where we're broadcasting from tonight. So I'm going to be informal. Mois, thank you so much for joining us tonight and letting people know exactly like what it is you're doing, and not just what you have done, but some of the really fascinating things you're working on now, and a little bit glimpse into the future of what the scientific and Torah future holds for us. So again, thanks for joining me. And maybe we'll start off with giving our watchers a little bit, our viewers, that would be the word, become semi-lingual in 2 languages, how you got here and like what your life's path has been so far.
Okay, I mean, can you hear me okay? Should I try to move? Maybe
Yeah.
I'll try to move this microphone. No. It's okay?
I'm good.
Right? The sound is okay? Good.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay, to try to put in a nutshell, you know, how did I get here? How did from the beginning? I mean, I grew up in Los Angeles, basically a secular, traditional Jew. We were raised with kind of Jewish pride, but we really didn't know what we were supposed to be proud of. And slowly, you know, I became more involved in Judaism. There was sort of a turning point in my life when I started working at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is a division of NASA in Pasadena near Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. I was studying computer engineering at UCLA, and a friend of the family gave me this student position at JPL. And basically, you know, he was my engineering mentor. You know, he taught me everything about the real world of engineering as opposed to the academic world. And among the things that he taught me, it turns out that he was a religious Jew. And so he started teaching me, you know, at lunchtime, we would talk about Jewish philosophy, and we would talk about, you know, the meaning of life. And
light subjects over 2
Yeah, very light subjects. The lunches, they started out, you know,
right,
between an hour and 2 hours and 3 hours. And
okay.
yeah, we spoke a long time about a lot of heavy stuff. And, you know, all of those kinds of ideas about why we're here and that there's a purpose and that you're here to fix yourself and you're here to fix the world. And basically the ideas of tikkun olam and tikkun nefesh and that Judaism has a framework of ethics. Those are ideas that always fascinated me. The idea of is there a purpose to our being here? The idea of like, how do you define right and wrong? You know, so those were 2 really essential questions that I'd always had and no one ever talked to me about. And here was somebody who was telling me that there's, you know, a tradition of thousands of years that you're a part of that answers those questions. And so like I said, those ideas began to resonate with me, and I slowly became more and more religious. And then in my years at UCLA, so I met this girl who then became this woman who became my wife. And she also came from pretty much the same background as me. And so the two of us took this journey to religious Judaism. And then, you know, at the core of religious Judaism is the state of Israel, is the living in the land of Israel. And, you know, there's a lot of times there's a discussion between the land of Israel and the state of Israel. I'm certainly not somebody, I don't know how many people could possibly live in the land of Israel without the state of Israel. I mean, if they could, either they're like amazing martyrs or they're living in La La Land. You know, the state of Israel has provided us with the means to live in this land of Israel. And so basically my wife and I decided that we would try to live in this land, and we came here for a year after we got married, and learned in yeshiva and traveled the country. And basically we decided that we would make our home here. And it turns out we went back to Los Angeles because we didn't really have the wherewithal to make it stick. And so I worked in a couple of different places in Los Angeles. I worked for what's known as Ronald Reagan's Star Wars system, which is basically, in Israel, it's known as Kippat Barzel, you know, shooting missiles in space or in close range, whatever. And so that gave me another little leap in the background of my engineering career. And then I was able to get a job here at IBM Israel, which is a great landing ground in Israel, because IBM Israel is one of, or at the time anyway, in 1992, was one of 3 R&D facilities that IBM had outside of the United States. So it was very well thought of. I mean, it's very hard work. I really learned to design chips there. You know, my background was in computer engineering and designing hardware, but to really get into the guts of designing chips, I learned it, you know, with the sweat and blood, and, you know, as they say in Israel, breaking your teeth. A lot of small
1992, and that's an interesting time, because it's at the end of the 1980s that the Soviet Union kind of disintegrates, and we get a massive wave of aliyah of highly trained people, engineers, etc., scientists, whom a lot of people feel now were really the push, what's called the startup nation. What's happening here in Israel, starting then and continuing on through today, is very much around the late 80s, early 90s, which is when you're here too, and there's really that gelling of a lot of brain power in a very little country.
Correct.
So the timing was good for you.
Yeah, the timing was great for me. I mean, it was really, you know, just before, I mean, whatever, a decade before this, really, the startup nation exploded. You know, when I worked for IBM, I mean, IBM was this bastion of technology that Yosef Raviv Zatzal, he's the guy who basically was working in the Technion and brought the IBM facility to the Technion campus. And that was really the seeds of this startup nation. But you're 100% right that I think that the Russians form the backbone of this startup nation. I know that in every company that I worked for, there were, you know, really smart Russians. Mobileye's backbone is all, you know, Russian. I mean, not all, but whatever. There's a strong element of Russian engineers. I think that they're very smart guys, and they have a strong work ethic. You know, they're interested in doing a good job, and they do. You know, I mean, I had many interactions and projects where it was me and, you know, a Russian engineer here, a Russian engineer there, that we, you know, battled out ideas to get things, you know, not simple things.
And interesting, because you come from such different cultures. I mean, here they're coming from a place that was to some degree repressive, right? And that's why they got out. And you're coming from the United States with that kind of education, and everything is open to you, and democracy and freedom, you know, to be able to do what you want. So that's, I think, also what makes Israel interesting, is that you have different bright people, but coming with from different backgrounds, different educational systems, and able to, one of the things that the Russians have also brought us, of course, is fabulous music, right? Our philharmonics, even in some of the small cities in Israel, are now world class. So using that analogy, that orchestra, right? Bringing in the different voices and the different instruments from different places and making a whole new sound in a very unique way. So tell us, you mentioned Mobileye, which is really where, it's at right now. So tell us a little bit about this company that I would imagine most of the people watching this have heard of Mobileye, and if not, please tell us about it, because this is one company that's really, global in every sense.
Right. So, Mobileye became sort of the poster child for the startup nation because when we went public in 2014, it was the largest IPO in Israeli history. And then when Intel bought out Mobileye in 2017, it was the largest and still remains the largest exit in Israeli history. And so it made a huge ripple effect in the whole world. The R Crowd CEO, John Medford, was quoted in the press at the time saying that all hell has broken loose from this deal, and that people are coming to him from all over the world. There's people calling from every country that you can imagine, right, and just saying, we want to invest. And so that really was a huge takeoff. Also, it made Israel is a startup nation. It made us sort of the mobility center of the world. Now there's this whole area called mobility, which basically deals with anything that has to do with cars or anything that has to do with transportation. And it includes anything from hardware to software to networks to algorithms. And so a lot of money is poured into this country to boost that whole area of research and development.
Moving people around, Waze, etc. Which is, if there's one app, maybe aside from WhatsApp, that I need on my phone, that would be the one. So what is Mobileye? What did you really work hard to invent that makes this company so important?
So, the end of the story is autonomous vehicles, but the beginning of the story is something completely different. When I started working for Mobileye at the very beginning in 2001, it was a company that had some algorithms that could take a single camera feed, basically a video camera that's looking out your front windshield, and do image processing, image by image, and analyze the scene and realize that there's a person in front of you, a car in front of you, a lane is changing, whatever. It can analyze, and then it can take control of the car in some way. Originally, the whole idea was to make adaptive cruise control. You put on cruise control, and now you're in a traffic jam, so you don't put on the brakes, the car puts on the brakes. And when the traffic jam clears, so you don't put the gas on, the car goes back to what it was set at. And so basically the camera can see what's going on and take control of the car. Over the years, slowly, different applications evolved, I would say, and we became aware of different things that we could do. And then one of the main ones that's being sold today in millions of cars is what's called ADAS, Advanced Driving Assistance Systems. And those are systems that put on the brakes if there's an emergency, that will keep you in your lane, will warn you if they're getting too close, and so, or traffic sign recognition and high beam movements and all these kind of things that basically put an envelope of safety around the car. And so those became the next applications. And then once we realized that we were doing all of this control, so then we decided to prototype an autonomous vehicle. And that became really the future of Mobileye, because that's really the future of mobility is autonomous vehicles. For those of you who aren't aware or aren't aware as how impactful this will be. So, I have a whole lecture on how autonomous vehicles are going to just change everything in the world. And they're going to come, and they're going to come sooner than you think. There are all kinds of estimates when autonomous vehicles will be here. Mobileye already has robo-taxi pilots, meaning pilot program where we're going to test out a city that will have just these autonomous vehicles that you will be able to get into and take you from point A to point B in a very well mapped out area.
Without you doing anything, you just sit there.
Without doing anything, yeah. except for probably swiping your credit card. But yeah,
right, always.
right. That doesn't go away. However, it should get cheaper because you know, a huge percentage of a taxi ride is the driver. And then also all the safety that gets built into the cars because we have human drivers. You know, once computers are driving, we will probably be able to make cars much lighter, thinner, more compact, faster, because computers are driving. You know, the estimates. I mean, there's a lot of estimates about how much the autonomous vehicle is going to save in lives and in accidents, but we're looking at like at least 90% reduction in car accidents and in car deaths. You know, today the World Health Organization puts the number at like 3,400. 3,400 people die on the roads every day. Like 1.25 million a year. In the US alone, it was like 35,000. The death toll is just unbearable. The UN had put out already years ago an idea called Vision Zero, where we need to bring that number to zero. And all of these kinds of applications like advanced driving assistance systems, which include automatic emergency braking and so forth, those are helping. But and so are the Mobileye warning systems that are put in aftermarket. But at the end of the day, ultimately what's going to save lives are getting the number one factor for accidents out of the car, and that's the driver.
The human error.
Yeah.
And of course that doesn't factor in injuries from accidents and the tremendous costs both to the people who are injured, their families, the medical systems.
Right.
You know, deaths are one thing, another.
Right. The World Health Organization says that it's something like 3% of a country's GDP is spent on just dealing with accidents and all the ripple effect of it.
Wow.
So that's millions, if not billions of dollars, depending on what country we're talking about.
And not even including the human suffering. So
right.
I have so many questions for you. But what pops into mind, especially since we're in the few days before we call the Yamim Noraim, right? Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and not just in Israel, but around the Jewish world, and I would say not even the Jewish world, because there are a lot of people who are also into the Bible and into this time period. It's like an introspective period, thinking about things that we're doing, things that we'd like to make better. And this year for sure, the issue of how much control we have over our lives, I would say, is on the top of most people's minds. We're going now into a 3-week lockdown in Israel because the government has, to some degree, lost control of the pandemic here, and they're trying to bring it back and save lives. Even though it's going to hurt the economy, the paramount consideration here is saving lives. And in general, I think most of us thinking people realize that we only control things to a certain degree. We do our best. If you're a believing person, you might feel bottom line is God, but we try and do our best. So now you're talking about control of something, taking control away from us of something that for many of us has been second nature for a long time, which is driving. And there's also this little sidebar. A lot of people enjoy driving. So that's, you know, something else, like will it just be now on racetracks? Where does this go? Meaning, there's one concern, what if the electrical grid or whatever's running the computer system is taken over by a foreign element, right? Because that would be if you were, let's say, Iran or pick it, whoever you want, bad guy, right? Who wants to cause total and utter chaos in a society. You're gonna hack into this road system, cause tremendous deaths, accidents, and who knows what. And that's really all you have to do without firing a missile. So that's one question, the vulnerability of all this system. And the next one is, and this is something that's why I want you to introduce yourself, and the fact that you're a rabbi and a philosopher is so big here. In terms of the Jewish world, where do we still say, oh, we're going to do this on our own? And I just want to make it clear here, in case it's not clear, that When Israel Fund is not giving any kind of halachic stamp on anything that we're discussing here. All right, we're having a conversation, raising a lot of questions, and probably not going to get some answers, but the idea here was to get the viewers to really maybe think about things that I know I didn't think about too much until I was aware of what you're doing. So, for example, on Shabbat, so right, most of us, if you're an Orthodox Jew, you don't get in a car and drive on the Sabbath for 25 hours, Friday, Sunday, right? So, but let's say this car is like an automatic thing at some point, right? You could get in and you could go drive to another city. Where does it end in terms of that? Is that still Shabbat observance? Are there people thinking about this from that end of it? So I know I just threw a lot of questions at you, but I know you can handle it. Because these are very, very, as the world gets more modernized and more out of our hands, do we want to keep some things in our hands? And where do we go with this? This is something that the Torah, the Talmud, the Bible, the great scribes, I don't think in their wildest dreams could have come up with some of the scenarios that we're dealing with today. So that's just a few light questions for you.
Right. So, if I heard you correctly, I mean, I heard really basically four things. I mean, one was, is it what lessons?
So, okay.
Yeah. What lessons can we learn from the coronavirus making us feel so vulnerable and out of control? That's the first question. I would say, look, I have a whole shiur on why. There's many people that wrote about why, and nobody knows the answer to why the coronavirus. But we all have a duty to kind of introspect when things like this happen. That's a teaching from the Rambam, that when bad things happen, so it's not necessarily that we know why, but we should ask ourselves, what can we learn from this? Why can we answer? And I mean, I think one of the most beautiful answers that I found true to me is that, we're all connected. The fact of the matter that I'm healthy here doesn't do me any good because I can't go out of my house, right? We're all connected, and we all need to try to realize that. Also, I wear a mask. I know I'm not sick, but I wear a mask, so everybody should wear a mask. And so that we try in the little way that we can to try to help each other. And so that's a lesson not only within a community, but it's really the whole world. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, that's one lesson about why. I mean, the fact that we're out of control, of course, everybody should learn that, there's only so much control that we have. And, the rest is we leave it to God. But we need to do what we can do. Mm-hmm. And that maybe leads us to this technology aspect of, how much do we give over to technology? So you brought up the fear of hacking. And, a lot of people, when I talk about autonomous vehicles, so a lot of people talk about, what if the car gets hacked? And there were some high profile cases where certain people were able to hack into a Jeep or get into the infotainment and then get into the control. You can ask that question really on almost anything. That what if somebody hacks in, the Iranians tried to hack into our electric grid or our water system, right? I mean, any of that stuff, it exists today. And so, cybersecurity is one of the other big fields of Israel that, is of a necessity. The mobility sort of sprung out of a lot of R&D, but the cybersecurity sprung out of a very great need of the country to be able to secure its whole data infrastructure. Right. And so I believe that we cannot limit the application of technology because we're afraid of people that will abuse it. We don't stop flying planes even though there are terrorists. We don't stop getting into cars. We don't stop living. Right? We try to do everything we can to mitigate those things, but we don't stop the progress of technology, which is helping society. And I truly believe, that technology is the spearhead of tikkun olam, of fixing the world. We are making the world a better place. The world that we live in today, 200 years ago, before the Industrial Revolution, is a completely different world. And nobody would want to go back to those days of washing clothes at the river that were dyed in dyes that were made from snails and bugs and, right? I mean, right. And that's just touching on the really low-tech side of what's changed since the Industrial Revolution. So I firmly believe in advancing technology, and I firmly believe in trying to do everything we can to keep it safe. And I firmly believe that we need to make it ethical. We always have to go hand in hand with making sure that we don't abuse technology. And so I think that maybe brings us, if we skip over the question about, the COVID and the money and the lockdown, which was another issue you brought up. But if we skip over that and we go to the Shabbat car, so that really brings us to the intersection of Torah and science. And that's an intersection that I really live in because I believe that science and technology are fundamental to the Jewish way of life. I mean, we believe in what's known as Torah Umada. We believe in Jewish philosophy and ethics, and in the combination with the real world, with science and all the other, and the arts and everything else that goes on in the world. And to paraphrase Norman Lamb, I mean, the two, Zatzal, the two can't live apart from each other. And I mean, and Albert Einstein said that religion without science is blind, and science without religion is lame, meaning it can't move forward. You need to have the two together. And so, yeah, it's true. I love technology and I want to use it and apply it, but we also need to think about the ethics of applying it. One question is a very religious question that you asked, is about Shabbat. The other one, which is a more general one that the whole world is asking, is, how do you program an autonomous vehicle ethically? What if it gets into an ethical dilemma where it's going at a certain speed and it can't put on its brakes fast enough, and there's
the trolley problem.
Right, the trolley problem. Yes. Exactly. Right. So the whole world is talking about this problem. Whether it's a real problem or not is another question. I mean,
you want to explain what that is for those who aren't
sure.
familiar?
Yeah. So the trolley problem is a classic ethical dilemma, thought problem that was put forth by a philosophy professor by the name of Philippa Foot in 1967. And she said, what if you're on a trolley and the trolley's lost its brakes, and in the tracks in front of you are 5 men tied to the tracks, and now you're going to run them over. They can't run away. You can't do anything. The only thing you can do is you can switch the track and you can go and save the 5. But unfortunately, on this other track, there's one guy that's tied to the track. And so now this is like a classical ethical dilemma where, how do you solve this? I mean, you're looking at basically actively killing one person or passively killing 5. And so you get into the numbers game, which gets into utilitarian ethics versus what's known as deontological ethics, which deontology just basically means, deon in Greek means duties. We follow the rules. So, we have a rule, thou shalt not kill. So you can't actively kill somebody. So now you're in this, ethical dilemma. So there's many types of dilemmas like this, and it sort of brings to the fore that in an autonomous vehicle, you need to think about that in advance and program the car in advance. And so and then that also spills over into all kinds of AI. Artificial intelligence is basically taking control of everything from our refrigerator to the robot that's going to clean our house, to robots that are going to take care of our elderly parents, and so forth. And so, there's a whole field that's called moral agency. How do we program these things morally? Okay. And then there's another field which is called moral patiency. So now forget about that it's actually making any ethical decisions, but it's acting for us. We have this robot that you say, clean the dishes, set up the dining room. And so, and you have this robot that does it and says, okay, fine, right? And so now it becomes a moral patient in the sense that, how do you treat this thing? Do you treat it like a machine, or do you treat it like an animal, or do you treat it like a person? Where does this thing fall into our lives? So you may say, of course it's a machine, what do you care? So then now maybe you start talking to it like a slave owner, and then that impacts on you very negatively, right? There's a lot of literature that talks about how the slave owner became a very brutal person in his everyday life. And on the other hand, if we take it to the extreme, we say, no, you should really treat it like a person and so forth. So now you have people that are developing relationships with these things, and they're getting married to these robots, and it's already happened. There are countries that have legitimately given marriage certificates to people that have married what basically are called sex robots. And so, there's these extremes of how do we interact with them? And that's actually the subject of my doctoral thesis that I'm working on at Bar Ilan. I just got my master's in Jewish philosophy, and I'm now working on the doctoral thesis, which is this thesis of how do we interact with robots? And to a lot of people that aren't in this field, it may sound crazy, but people are already talking about the fact that robots are slowly taking over and becoming part of our lives. And how do we interact with them? And there's a whole school of atheist philosophy that says, of course you deal with them like people. What do you think you are? You're just artificial intelligence made out of meat. And that's artificial intelligence made out of silicon. But basically, you're just two highly sophisticated computational entities. And so, what I would like to do in my thesis is show that actually people are a little bit more than just sophisticated computers. And whether we know at what level this artificial intelligent humanoid is at, we need to develop some kind of ethics on how we relate. What I said before of moral patiency. So that's a mouthful right there. But if you want to.
I mean, a good part of Judaism, and I would imagine many other religions as well, is this issue of free choice, right? If you don't have any choice, then you can't ever be a good person or a bad person because you're just doing whatever. You're essentially a robot. Right. And at least for me, like a big part of being a human being is making those choices. Sometimes they're bad choices. Sometimes they're wrong choices. Sometimes they hurt people or myself. But that's what makes us who we are. Do we yell at someone or do we control our temper? Do we, whatever it is. So, and again, a lot of us are thinking about these things, particularly in this time of year. So you said that you're writing your doctoral thesis on this, but is there you said that there's faculties of thought. Is there a group of people, let's talk about in our world, in the Jewish world, is there a group of rabbis and philosophers and scientists, people who know all the ins and outs from both angles of what you're talking about now, who are really sitting and thinking this out? Because this world it's not just fast approaching, as you said, it's here. From the people who talk to Alexa, what's the weather going to be like today? I don't know, I guess you could not talk nicely to Alexa. She might yell at you. I don't know, I don't have it. It's a little creepy for me. But this is already here. So where are we, at least in the Jewish world or in Israel, where a lot of these companies are there? Are there people on the boards of the companies who are like the ethics committee, like you have in a hospital? Can someone have an abortion, not have an abortion, right? In certain hospitals, you actually have a group that's deciding on the ethics of the particular context of that pregnancy, right?
Right.
Do you have that now in some of the high tech?
So that there, you asked a lot of different questions. First of all, in terms of like the different people, are there people working on this? I mean, you have Machon Lev, right? Which is a Torah Mada Institute. Right. And they have been putting together a think tank. They asked me to be a part of it. It's still like in the process, okay? But they have rabbis and technology people that are thinking about questions like, for example, synthetic meat. Is it meat? Is it parv? Is it synthetic pig? Can you eat it? And so forth. And that, that's just one example of the interface of science and halacha. And so there is a group at Machon Lev. There's a group, of course, that's been working for a long time at Somet, which is working on the interface of that. And they actually invited me to do a whole seminar on autonomous vehicles and halacha. But unfortunately, coronavirus came in the way. So hopefully after that. And then,
for those who aren't familiar, the Somet Institute, they're like the ones who came up with, let's say, Shabbat Elevators, which many people have used. You go into a hotel, you're on the 12th floor, Shabbat, you don't have to push a button, the elevator automatically comes, it stops at each floor for 5 seconds or whatever it is. Also wheelchairs for people who are wheelchair bound can use on Shabbat without breaking the laws of Shabbat, and many, many things that have made life tremendously, not just easier, but in some ways even people can deal with things because of some of what they're doing. But have they, well, I guess they've also had to ask these halachic questions, of course.
Right, they have. And that brings us back to the Shabbat vehicle, the Shabbat autonomous vehicle, because actually there was a whole back and forth for several months in a I would say modern Orthodox journal where, like, for example, big rabbis like Rav Ariel, who was the chief rabbi of Ramat Gan, and a number of other rabbis that have more of a technical background, and they did a whole back and forth about, is the Shabbat elevator in any way parallel to the autonomous vehicle? I mean, they both are transporting you, they're both working, and you're not doing it. So Rav Ariel was very much against this parallel, because the main issue that he sees against autonomous vehicles on Shabbat is that it's in the public domain, it's in Befarhesia. And the Shabbat elevator is private and it's quiet. And he said that, there's a thing called avsha milta, making noise on Shabbat. And it's not just about making noise, it's about disturbing the Shabbat environment. And so he's very much against autonomous vehicles just for ruining the public Shabbat atmosphere. And he says that it's something really amazing. We all know that somebody who violates Shabbat is like he violated the entire Torah. Okay? So it turns out that that's not entirely true. It's only somebody who violated Shabbat Befarhesia. Right. If you smoke cigarettes and watch TV all Shabbat, I mean, it's not good, and we don't advise this, and you're not really keeping Shabbat, but it's not like you violated the entire Torah. But when you go outside and do it, so now you've just completely ruined everything. Mm-hmm. And so you're in a different category. And so he's very much against autonomous vehicles. I mean, he brings up all kinds of different points, which really, at the end of the day, there's only one main issue with getting into an autonomous vehicle on Shabbat. You don't really violate any of the 39, categories of work that you're not allowed to do. The lamed tet melachot. Basically, you violate a concept that's called uvdin dechol. Uvdin dechol means workday activities. And actually, there's a huge bucket of actions that we do or that we don't do on Shabbat because they're workday activities. I mean, the fact is that, we could do business and we could even trade with money. All of that falls into workday activities. And so we don't do those things. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the day, getting into an autonomous vehicle and going from, a lot to the I don't know where, to the north, to the Golan, you could do that, but you don't have Shabbat anymore. This is a kind of a workday thing where you've gotten in the car and you're not having Shabbat anymore. So that's really where this whole discussion ends up, is that technically there's no technical violation of Shabbat, but there is a spiritual violation, which is no less important. And so that's basically where this whole discussion is lining up, that at the end of the day, Shabbat isn't Shabbat if you can get in your car and just go and drive around for 25 hours in a car.
Mm-hmm. But some people will say, but if it takes me to a family dinner where right. I can celebrate Shabbat with my relatives, so I didn't see all week because everyone was so busy, then it actually enhances my Shabbat. I mean, right. There's no end to this. You mentioned the atmosphere of Shabbat. Look, technically, you could sit in your house, have your TV on an automatic clock, and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the game comes on. You haven't touched the television. You're not doing anything active. But that atmosphere of Shabbat, which has to be created, it doesn't just happen, is now not the same. Right. So, again, getting back to like individuals and control, do you think this is something that individuals are going to, on their own, make up their minds about where they feel comfortable, if this is ethical for them, if we can use that word in this context, or keeps Shabbat, or if it's going to be like electricity was, right? When electricity came up, is it one of those things that violates Shabbat because they didn't have electricity in the olden days? Is it a fire? Is it creating something? Is it burning? And it wasn't such a simple decision to say, no, you can't flip on a light. Right? So where do you think, as a philosopher and also a scientist who's deep in this, and as a father, I would say, as someone who's, no, but really, because as a parent, that's, I know for me and for you as well, and for many of the viewers, that's a big thing for us, is what are we teaching our kids in terms of right and wrong and the atmospheres that we want to create? Do you think that this is going to come down to some kind of like stamp, either of approval or not, from rabbis that some people won't listen to or not, because that's what happens with rabbis, or that this is something that might be left to the individuals to make that decision for themselves, if this is going to fit in with the lifestyle that they're creating for themselves?
Look, I think the answer is the way we see Judaism today, where you have, you know, orthodoxy and conservative and
Right.
reform and people that are falling in between. And there's no question that there will be piskei halacha that will say you can or you can't use a autonomous vehicle. I think that, you know, the idea of going to the family dinner sounds very nice, but it's a slippery slope that was already slid on. Meaning the conservative movement said, you know, we believe that you shouldn't use a car, but to come to shul you can. And so everybody came, and then they went to the mall. I mean, and that's like, you know, that's historical fact. And
Right.
so no Orthodox posek is going to can look at it in such narrow terms of, yeah, okay, you can go to a family dinner, you can come to shul, because we know the social ramifications that basically people will go to their family, and then they'll go to the beach, and then they'll go to the track, and then they'll go wherever, and it's the end of it. And that's exactly the discussion that happened with the Zoom seders. You know,
Right.
I mean, again, the Zoom Seder is exactly the same thing as a Shabbat autonomous vehicle. You're not violating anything except uvdin dechol. And it's a slippery slope to shutting off the Zoom after we said Haggadah and playing whatever games people play these days on the internet.
But to play devil's advocate, if you will, that's up to the individuals, right? Where we all have that in our lives all the time, where we rein ourselves in from doing this, you know, and not doing that. And when it came to the Passover Seders, there were some Orthodox rabbis from the Sephardi world, from the Mizrahi world, the Middle Eastern world, who said that in this case, it was to some degree pikuach nefesh, right? So pikuach nefesh, for those who aren't familiar with the term, is saving a life. And saving a life trumps everything. You could eat a pig sandwich in a car on Yom Kippur if a doctor says you need that to save your life. Everything else goes. So in this particular year of Corona, some people were literally dying of loneliness. That I think is where they made their statement, that this could be allowed. It wasn't a blanket, blank check forever now, but this particular year with the crisis that we're given, this we could do it. So, but you could play that now in a lot of different ways.
Right. But what I'm saying is, first of all, I think that, you know, those kinds of cases would need to have a special, you know, leniency applied to grandma X and so forth, and not, you know, okay, this year you have Zoom Seders, because, you know, and I think that, again, there's a structure to this. Of course, everybody decides whatever they want. Some people decide that they're going to listen to a rabbi because they don't have enough time to really go into all of the ins and outs of the issue. Right? And so there's piskei halacha. There's a Jewish legal determination that this is the way we behave, okay? And so many people that follow that route, they're called Orthodox Jews, and they follow that. And then there will be Orthodox Jews that say, no, you know, I, of course, I'm Orthodox, but I'm going to learn the sugya. I'm going to learn all the ins and outs of it, and I'm going to make a decision. And they will read the psak halacha. They will read the whole decision and why and what. And then, yeah, you're right. They'll make their own decision, but it will be a personal decision. And then there is going to be groups like the conservative movement that will say, no, Zoom Seders are now what we do, you know? And then there will be people that will listen to that and so forth. I mean, the Jewish the Jewish world is pretty it's not homogenous as it used to be in the old days. And,
well, because of information and communication, and
right, and that's fine. But I mean, look, as an Orthodox or modern Orthodox Jewish rabbi who lives with 2 feet and, you know, a foot in each world, I definitely believe in the process of smart people, you know, going through the issues and arguing them out, and then coming to some kind of decision. And you asked if there are people who are in the know. I think Yosef Tzvi Rimon, who's the head of this think tank at Machon Lev, is a person who's got that, you know, his hands in these kind of information. I think that Yuval Sherlow is somebody that's very involved in Torah and science and spending a lot of time in that. I was invited actually to be part of a think tank that's just starting at Hebrew University, which is bringing together legal thinkers and halachic thinkers and philosophers and scientists, and we're all going to, I mean, it's going to start this semester. I'm also aware of a think tank like this that's at Tel Aviv University. So there are people that are doing this thinking and are doing the writing, and I think that will influence the rabbis at the end of the day who will have to make legal, Jewish legal decisions that will influence their populations that listen to them. But yeah, at the end of the day, in our world anyway, everybody does their thinking for themselves, and you'll read what you read and you'll think what you think. I mean, look, I was very torn about this whole Zoom Seder idea, but I definitely see the slippery slope, and I think that it basically will break the kind of world that we've spent building for 2,000 years.
Unless we can explain what you just explained, because ultimately it comes down to personal decision making. Look, somebody on Shabbat could go into a room quietly and do whatever he wants and nobody knows, right? But creating an atmosphere again on Shabbat is going to be one of personal choice. You could technically get into the car, right, and not be violating Shabbat, but you're losing perhaps something of Shabbat for the fact that you're moving very far from one place to another. So it's almost like diametrically opposed. On the one hand, many things are going to be done for us, whether it's by robots or autonomous systems. We're not going to even have to think about them anymore. On the other hand, we're going to have to do a lot more thinking. Where is the red line for me? When it comes to creating an atmosphere of Shabbat, where does it now fall for me? I could text on my phone. Let's say I have a phone that's okay for Shabbat. But does that act of texting, which is something that usually falls into a work kind of atmosphere, and I'll just do this and I'll just answer that email, and then Shabbat is gone. So to some degree, we're all going to have to think harder about what we believe and how we create these worlds for ourselves. If I'm eating a cheeseburger and I know that it's fake meat with a piece of cheese on it, somebody's going to look at me and say, wow, she says she's an Orthodox Jew, but she's eating meat and milk together. So that Marit Ayin issue, right? Where does that responsibility lie for, I know I'm doing it okay, but maybe I'm setting a bad example, or I'm, making Judaism look bad, which is a responsibility that we all have, whether Jews or Christians. If you're promoting a certain religion or a certain way of life and you're responsible for how it looks, if you mess up, it could cast aspersions on the whole thing. So it's such an interesting time that we're coming into, where it looks like some things we can think about less or not at all, and other things we're going to have to think about more. So do you think we need to start educating our kids in this realm? Talk about the think tanks, you talk about certain universities, but should we already in the high schools, where the kids are already really, as adults, they should be learning for themselves and thinking about these issues. Do you think that in the curriculum of, at least let's say the Jewish day schools, or the whatever approaches that there should be people already teaching these issues to the teens as before they reach adulthood?
I think so, for many reasons, not just for the practical reason. I think that we should be teaching them for the philosophical reason, for the reason that shows that Judaism is alive, and that Judaism has a lot to say about real life. And so those kinds of ideas will begin to percolate in students' minds, that that Judaism, I mean, the greatest thing about Judaism is that it is this ethical framework, that and the meaningful framework. Those two issues that I brought in the beginning, that really are what brought me to Orthodox Judaism, is that the purpose of life and the ethics in life, and those two, and Judaism has so much to say about that. And even if nobody in their wildest dreams in the Gemara could have thought of an autonomous vehicle or a robot, a humanoid, there are still frameworks that the Gemara provides us to discuss these things. You would be surprised that in the Talmud Yerushalmi there is already a discussion like the trolley problem. The trolley problem has been discussed 2,000 years before Philippa Foot put it on in print. And the same thing with the humanoid robot. Rava created a gavra. He created a golem. And, even the non-Jews are bringing this example of the golem to try and deal with things like the humanoid robot or a cloned being. And so there's a lot in our Jewish texts that provide a framework. I'm not saying they give the answer. You're not going to open up the book and say, oh yeah, here, this is it. It's not like that. Okay, from all of my research on these subjects, what I have been totally impressed with is that it provides a framework. It provides a space for us to talk about something. Whereas all the other secular philosophers, they're just coming up with ideas and throwing out ideas like from nowhere.
Right.
And some of the ideas are really crazy ideas. They don't, and then they shoot them down right away because they don't make any sense. And so at least Judaism gives us a very solid framework to discuss modern ethical issues. And so, yeah, I think that these things should be taught as soon as possible because A, they're really interesting, and B, they give life to a system that a lot of kids, unfortunately, don't realize has so much relevance. And then the last thing I wanted to say is just to go back to your whole thing about individuals coming up for themselves, and there's so many things that people have to do. There's no question that individuals need to try to make their own personal decisions, but individuals also, again, I said it before and I'll say it again, need to understand that these topics are huge and that they may not have the wherewithal to go by them, but to go into all the depth of it. And so they need to choose somebody or some people or some kind of platform that gives them some direction. So, and that's the whole idea of having a rabbi or a rebbe. I'm not saying go to the rebbe and ask him for every little thing, but I am saying that, when you're making a huge decision, sometimes you don't have all the information. I mean, in this case of a Shabbat car, yeah, you can say, look, or Zoom, you can say, nothing happened. I'm good to go. But you're not taking into account all of the social repercussions and all of there's so many other aspects to it. And so you really need some kind of a role model. You really need a rabbi. I once heard Rabbi Steinsaltz said, we say that you should go ask a rabbi. Again, Zatzal, another great mind that we lost in this period, is that, and I heard in a lecture of his, I had the great merit to hear a few lectures from him in person. And one of the lectures he said is that, you don't go to a rabbi and ask him a question because you think he's smarter than you. Really? Whoa. So why do I go to a rabbi and ask a question? Because you need a third party input. Because you are biased, because you can't get out of your little box. And so you need to bounce this off of somebody who can give you some kind of objective third-party opinion. And so, yeah, you thought about all the angles and yeah, I'm saving my grandmother's life and etc. But now all of your kids are watching Looney Tunes or playing Cartoon Network, whatever the heck it is. I don't know what the current nonsense is, but people that your whole family now is playing on their phone all every Shabbat because it's okay, Right. And so again, you, like Rabbi Steinsaltz said, you need to go to somebody else to bounce the idea off of so that you can get an unbiased third-party opinion from somebody that you respect, not necessarily from somebody who just knows more. And also, when you know me also from Techelet, I'm very involved in the blue string and so forth, and that's a big revolution in Jewish practice, which I proudly promote. But when I was first learning about it, I learned, and I said, maybe I didn't really learn everything. I mean, are there any big rabbis that say something about this? And when I found that Rav Schechter promoted it, so I said, okay, there's somebody that I respect that I can follow on. And so even though I did tons of research, I didn't actually make the move till I found other people who I respect that had done the research. Making a personal decision isn't so simple. We don't just say, oh yeah, that makes sense, I'll do that.
Well, we don't do it. We're going to have a surgery. You obviously consult with specialists or get even a few opinions. So, I mean, one of the things that definitely pops to my mind is perhaps we need to be training teachers now. I mean, if we want the kids to be able to grapple with these issues, you have to have the people who are able to teach it to them properly, who they themselves know the issues, not just a few people in think tanks here or there, but really a generation now of young men and women who can go in and teach them what to think, but how to think and where the resources are. Because look, these days, I had to, you and I probably had to memorize the capitals of all 50 states in the United States, right? For whatever reason. You don't have to do that anymore because it's at the touch of the fingertip. You get the answers. What needs to be done now in education is teaching people how to think, not how to get information, but how to think, where to get the information from, and how to put it together in a way that, you mentioned morals and ethics, but we've seen that those can be very trendy There's certain things that are considered moral in today's world that even 50 years ago would never have crossed that. So it's a very subjective term, is what I'm trying to say. So at least, within the framework, as you said, there are those kinds of boundaries. So one last question, and then there's a question actually that someone put up on the chat that I'll ask you. But before that, I wanted to ask you, there are many scientists who don't believe in God. And you read about that all the time because they're scientists. It's almost the antithesis of being a religious person, because everything is chemicals and everything is physics and everything is, just happened, right? Or is happening. It's fascinating, but it's happening. You, as an engineer, but also as a scientist and definitely as a philosopher, the deeper that you have gotten into the science and artificial intelligence, has that made you more, I don't know if the word is humble, but more understanding that there has to be a higher power behind all this? Or on the other hand, feeling like, no, like men and women pretty much have a good crack at this. How has it developed in your own
right? So I mean, it's a long process, and there's a lot of battling within yourself when you learn certain ideas one way or the other, just within Jewish philosophy and also within science. And science has been sort of the bulwark against religiosity ever since the Enlightenment. But the fact of the matter is that as we whittle down and we begin to understand more and more, there are certain areas which are screaming at us that there's something else going on here. And one of them happens to be artificial intelligence. So in the beginning of artificial intelligence, people said, people are just computers. We'll build computers fast enough, strong enough, smart enough, and they'll do whatever people do. But then slowly, we realize that we're not just computational entities, but we have emotions. And emotions play a strong part in the way we make our decisions and who we are. And so there's now a move to try to implant emotions in humanoid robots. But then we got to this other level where people have what's known as consciousness. Okay. And in English, we use this word mind. Okay. We have a brain and we have a mind. And so in philosophical terms, mind has a very specific application, which means your consciousness. You could be a zombie that has a brain. It's just a computer that thinks that drives decisions, but it doesn't really know what it's doing. It has no sense of itself. Okay. And so it doesn't actually know, like my autonomous vehicle that I love to give the example. I designed this chip that detects cars on the road. Okay. So now my chip sees a red Ferrari and it tracks it and it follows it and it makes sure that you keep your distance and it'll put on the brakes if you get too close. It knows that there's a car there, but doesn't really know. It's just following this red object. But, when I, in my car, drive and see this red Ferrari, I'm like, wow, that's a red Ferrari, right? So there is no wow, there's no experience inside a computer. It's just a brain. It has no mind, okay? It has no consciousness. And so now this is the huge question that philosophers of late for the last decade and a half or so have been working on. There's a guy named David Chalmers who famously put forth an article where he coined the term the hard problem of consciousness. And the hard problem of consciousness is that we have no idea how these two things talk to each other. We have no idea what's the interface, what's this layer of consciousness that says wow, and this layer of consciousness that follows the red Ferrari. They work independently. And so and so this is, for religious people, even not religious people, they're saying we have no solution for this. And that it's like this crazy thing. But, as religious people, we call that the soul. And right. And so, I would say that my investigations into artificial intelligence have provided me with more of a reason to be a believer than not.
Wow.
And there's many other aspects of science that also, you can definitely be a religious scientist even today, even more so today, I would say.
Right. Is that you, like the wonder of what God created is to the detail, to such detail, is just really mind-blowing.
Right. And that's the other aspect of all the parameters of this world, that we're able to have this conversation without sinking into the ground, because gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared and not 9.87 or 9.9, and et cetera.
Right. And breathing the air that's exactly the way we need it and all that. Amazing. So somebody sent in a question, and then we can wrap this up. It's a variation on the trolley dilemma with practical consequences. 5 people rush into the street in front of a driver, me. The only way to avoid hitting them is to swerve and crash into a brick wall, thereby killing the driver, me. So if that's the choice between hurting other people or hurting yourself, is there an answer to this one?
So that's an excellent question. The question about committing suicide, and there's, as you would imagine, there's actually 3 opinions. You're never allowed to commit suicide. You are never allowed to murder, and so you must. And the last one is that you can, right? Like you can be an altruist, right? Mm-hmm. And so, but that's, this is talking about if you were going to actively kill somebody versus actively kill yourself. Then you have this dilemma, and like I said, there are opinions in Judaism that answer in all kinds of different ways. Mm-hmm. But the altruist opinion is always open.
Yeah. Look, I know that. I mean, this came up at my Shabbat table a few years ago with a soldier at my table who was in a situation where there was somebody pointing a tank, an anti-tank missile at his tank that he was sitting in, but they were holding a little child in front of them. This was in Lebanon. So in that split second, do you kill the terrorist, but also the child? And every instinct in his body is, I don't kill children, right? Or do he and the other guys in his tank fry, right? So obviously he was sitting at my table because the missile missed. But these are very real questions that come up, especially in a situation where you have an army and children in the army. These come up all the time. This is not a theoretical question, and the answers are very, very difficult. And we're asking 18-year-olds to make them in a split second. So we live in this. Rabbi Mois Navon, thank you so much. I know you illuminated a lot for me, and I'm sure you did for my viewers as well. And I know we haven't heard the last of you from you either, and how your brain is working all the time. This is just a fascinating field. But I'm very, very glad that people who are believers and feel that there's a higher power here are also very much involved in the very, very cutting edge science that we have. Because as you said, that's really the way that we need to go, the intersection of Torah and science. So thank you so much for joining me tonight here in Israel, and Shana Tova, and wishing all the viewers as well a Shana Tova wherever you are. Should be healthy, first of all, and peaceful, and 5781 should be the best year ever for humanity. Let's leave all this stuff behind. So take care, everyone. Eve Harow, 41 Israel Fund. Thank you so much for joining us, and be well until the next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.